Hi everyone. We are taking a look again at Problem from Hell. We are on to chapter 2. Yeah. So, a crime without a name. Sagan Teleran, the young Armenian survivor, knew little of the international treaties of geopolitics. He knew only that his life had been empty since the war, that Talat was responsible and the former minister of the Interior would never stand trial. Since the massacre of his family and injury to his head, Teleran had been unable to sleep and had been overcome by frequent epileptic seizures. In 1920, he had found a cause, enlisting in the Operation Nemesis, a Boston-based Armenian plot to assassinate the Turkish leaders involved in targeting the Armenians. He was assigned to murder Talat, a crime that earned him everlasting glory in the Armenian community with brief global notoriety. While Teleran awaited trial in Berlin, Raphael Lemkin, a 20-year-old Polish Jew studying linguistics at the University of Lvov, uh, came upon a short news item on Talat's assassination in the local paper. Lemkin was intrigued and brought the case to attention of one of his professors. Lemkin asked why the Armenians did not have Talat arrested for this massacre. The professor says there was no law under which he could be arrested. Consider this case of a farmer who owns his own flock of chickens, he said. He kills them, and this is his business. If you interfere, you are trespassing. It is a crime for Teleran to kill a man, but it is not a crime for his oppressor to kill more than 1,000,000 men? Lemkin asked. This is most inconsistent. And then we have Jewish boy being forced to write Jude on his father's store in Vienna, Austria, within days of the Germans' Angelus. I forgot how to pronounce it. Lemkin was appalled for the banner of state sovereignty. Lemkin was appalled that the banner of state sovereignty could shield men who try to wipe out an entire minority. Sovereignty, Lemkin argued to the professor, implies conducting an independent foreign and internal policy, buildings for schools, construction of roads, all types of activity directed towards the welfare of people. Sovereignty cannot be conceived as the right to kill millions of innocent people. But it was the states, and particularly strong states, that made the rules. Lemkin read about the abortive British effort to try the Turkish perpetrators and saw that the states would rarely pursue justice out of commitment to justice alone. They would do so only if they came under political pressure, if the trial served strategic interests, or if the crimes affected their citizens. Lemkin was torn about how to judge Teleran's act. On one hand, Lemkin credited the Armenian with upholding the moral order of mankind and drawing the world's attention to the Turkish slaughter. Teleran's case had quickly turned into an informal trial of the deceased. Sorry. Uh, I forgot. I'll just start from here. Lemkin was torn about how to judge Teleran's act. On the one hand, Lemkin credited the Armenians with upholding the moral order of mankind and drawing the world's attention to the Turkish slaughter. Teleran's case had quickly turned into an informational trial and deceased Talat for his crimes against the Armenians. The witnesses and written evidence introduced Teleran's defense, brought Ottoman horrors to their fullest light to date. The New York Times wrote that the documents introduced the trial, established once and for all for the fact. Oh, you fell on me. There we go. The New York Times wrote that the documents introduced in the trial established once and for all the fact that the purpose of the Turkish authorities was not deportation but annihilation. But Lemkin was uncomfortable that Teleran, who had been acquitted on the grounds of what today would be called temporary insanity, had acted as the self-appointed legal officer of conscience of mankind. Passion, he knew, would often make a travesty of justice. Impunity for mass murderers like Talat had to end. Retribution had to be legalized. A decade later, in 1933, Lemkin and then a lawyer made plans to speak before the International Crime Law Conference in Madrid, before the distinguished gathering of elder colleagues. Lemkin drafted a paper that drew attention to both Hitler's assent to the Ottoman slaughter of the Armenians, a crime that most Europeans had either ignored or had filed away as Eastern phenomenon. If it happened once, the young lawyer urged, it would happen again. If it happened there, he argued, it could happen here. Lemkin offered up a radical proposal. If the international community ever hoped to prevent mass slaughter of the kind of Armenians had suffered, he insisted, the world's states would have to unite in a campaign to ban the practice. With that end in mind, Lemkin had prepared a law that would prohibit the destruction of nations, races, and religious groups. The law hinged on what he called universal repression, a precursor to what is today called universal jurisdiction. The instigators and the perpetrators of these acts would be punished wherever they were caught, regardless of where the crime was committed, or the criminal's nationality or official status. The attempt to wipe out national, ethnic, or religious groups like the Armenians would become an international crime that could be punished anywhere, like slavery or piracy. The threat of punishment, Lemkin argued, would yield a change in practice. Barbarity. Lemkin had been oddly consumed by the subject of atrocity, even before he heard Talleyrand's story. In 1913, when he was 12, Lemkin had read the Nobel Prize winner Henrik Kuvadis, which recounts the Roman Empire Nero's massacre on Christian converts in the 1st century. Lemkin grew up in a sprawling farm in eastern Poland near the town of Wokisow. I can't pronounce these words. Some 50 miles from the city of Bialystok, which was then part of Tsarist Russia. Although Lemkin was Jewish, many of his neighbors were Christian. He was aghast that Nero would feed Christians to lions, and asked his mother, Bella, how the emperor could have elicited cheers from a mob of spectators. Bella, a painter, linguist, and student of philosophy who homeschooled her 3 sons, explained that once the state had become determined to wipe out the ethnic or religious group, the police and the citizenry became the accomplices and not the guardians of human life. As a boy, Lemkin often grilled his mother on details of historical cases of mass slaughter, learning of the sacking of Carthage and the Mongol invasions and the targeting of French Huguenots. The bibliophile, he raced through an unusually grim reading list and set out to play a role in ending destruction of ethnic groups. I was an impressionable youngster, leaning to sentimentality, he wrote years later. I was appalled by the frequency of evil, and above all, the impunity coldly replied upon the guilty. The subject of slaughter had a fortunate personal relevance for him growing up in the Bialystok region of Poland in 1906. Some 70 Jews were murdered and 90 gravely injured in local pogroms. Lemkin had heard that the mobs opened the stomachs of their victims and stuffed them with feathers and pillows and comforters and grotesque mutilation rituals. He feared that the myth that the Jews liked to grind young Christian boys into matzah would lead to more killings. Lemkin saw that what he later described as a line of blood leading from the massacre of Christians in Rome to the massacre of Jews nearby. During World War I, while Armenians were suffering under Talat's menacing rule, the battle between Russians and Germans descended upon the doorstep of the Lemkin family farm. His mother and father buried the family books, and their few valuables took the boys to hide out in the forest that enveloped their land. In the course of the fighting, artillery fire ripped the farmhouse apart. The Germans seized their crops, cattle, and horses. Samuel, one of Lemkin's 2 brothers, died in the woods of pneumonia and malnourishment. The interwar period brought a brief respite for Lemkin and his fellow Poles. After the Russian-Polish War resulted in a rare Polish victory, Lemkin enrolled in the University of Lvov in 1920. His childhood Torah study had sparked a curiosity in the power of naming, and he had been long interested in the insight of the words supplied into culture. He had a knack for languages, and having already mastered Polish, German, Russian, French, Italian, Hebrew, and Yiddish, Jesus, Lord, he began to study philology, the evolution of language. He planned next to learn Arabic and Sanskrit. But in 1921, when Lemkin read the article about the assassination of Talat, he veered away from philology and back towards his dark childhood preoccupation. He transferred to Lvov Law School, where he scored ancient and modern legal codes for the laws prohibiting slaughter. He kept his eye trained on the local press, and an inquiry gained urgency as he got wind of pogroms being committed in the new Soviet state. He went to work as a local prosecutor in 1929 and began moonlighting on drafting an international law that would commit his government and others to stopping the targeted destruction of ethnic, national, and religious groups. It was this law that the cocksure Lemkin presented his European legal colleagues in Madrid in 1933.